Our next two speakers are Charbel and Andrew from Panasonic. Charbel has over 20 years of experience in retail and supply chain, working at the intersection of people, technology, and business strategy. He helps clients to get the most out of their technology to improve their customer experience through efficient flow of goods and data. Andrew is a consultative professional with a passion for building solutions to empower the end user. Driven by data and enabling technology to address the user's business, Andrew works closely with his clients to build and implement strategies to achieve exceptional customer experience and achieve an optimal outcome for all stakeholders. Over to you, Charbel and Andrew.
Thank you for that intro, Dan, and hello everyone. Thanks for attending our session at CMAT Australia Digital. I'm Charbel Masood, and along with my colleague Andrew Resk, we will discuss why data across the entire supply chain is critical for a seamless customer experience. Andrew and I will take you through the supply chain and share stories of our experiences, while also touching base on technologies available that will aid in the identification, collection, and sharing of data throughout the supply chain. The supply chain loop is effectively the loop in which customers peak the demand and then the products are made for that peak in demand. One of the most crucial parts within that is understanding what the customer needs and when they need it. That can only be achieved through data and having the correct data. Lots of organizations are really good at having data for certain demographics, for certain age groups. But the next step is going beyond that and collecting the data on the individuals. And what we're finding in today's world is that real drive for the individual-based data for the person themselves. And that's really led to the explosion in loyalty cards, because unless you're aware of it, the loyalty card is where they drive most of that data and how they get it. However, in the supply chain, there's a lot of other ways to get the data on the customer, and that's based purely on the technology that's used within the supply chain. The data on the individual is one side of it, and that's where we get it, and that's how the customer demand comes across for it. However, the data on the product and then throughout the actual supply chain and the value chain is where it becomes a bit more difficult and a bit trickier. Once that data is collected, there is a real onus on then sharing that and making sure that it's shared for the greater good. And that greater good is to finally give the customer that seamless experience. Whether we're talking an online purchase, whether it's an in-store purchase, and in some instances, there's a blend of both. There's the ability for the customer to jump online, see what they want, and then either click and collect to get that product or then go in store and purchase it. But it's really key that that data is clean and from the source, and not only from a demand point of view, but then from an information point of view. And throughout this presentation, both myself and Andrew will touch base on some of those areas where that data can be captured and how it can be captured. But all in all, our environment and our way of purchasing is because of the demand. And then the key for the retailers right at the end of that demand loop is making sure that they've got the right data. So they're requesting it from the distributor, who then pushes back onto the manufacturers and suppliers to make that product for them. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Charbel. So when we think about data and why is it so important for the consumer, and I think often in the supply chain space, we look at how do we get that product to that customer in a timely manner and it's efficient, but we sometimes lose real focus on that consumer, that customer. And I like this picture that's displayed here, because when you look at it, you think, is this person crying or are they happy, right? And that customer, and that's actually really all about the customer experience. But how many customers are involved in that experience? Is it just the raw product, as Charbel was mentioning in that loop, or is it the whole experience from when the customer purchases it online, so when it goes to the distribution center, the delivery person, then when it finally comes to your door? Because when we think of customer experience, we often just think about that the relationship between the customer and that raw product. But have we thought about the customer experience when they have clicked onto that website and they get notifications? And we live in an Uber world, right? So we're so excited to know when we order our product, when it's being cooked, when it's being delivered, how far is that driver? Are they just up the road? Great, they're up the road, they're about to enter the door, and then finally my food is here. But what I'm trying to take from that example is around that data as you go along, being gathered and then delivered to you, gives that customer a sense of security that what I've ordered is being here and not being notified. And that also translates when you look at the supply chain. And from recent experiences, even ordering home and school applies for the children. And when you go onto the website, there's a stock that's available. You go to the store and you often sometimes you find that it's not available. And that's that connection between what's available online and then what's available in store. And some retailers have it, and then some retailers, sometimes they fall short on making that connection between the online and the in-store. And I was at a conference in New York, a national retail conference. And what they were saying was a trend that was going to come out of that is every location was going to become a mini distribution center. So instead of products coming out of one main national distribution center, it was coming out from the store that's local to that person. And that's that shift between that globalization that we've always been taught was one of the new trends that was coming out. And now this shift from recent events has obviously accelerated it, but that trend towards localization, getting it from the local store and making sure that's there. And a technology that's really popular in Europe is electronic shelf labels, which is essentially a tag that plays the function of a tag that has e-paper running through it, that at a base level can change prices from a central location. But it also adds another function to inside the supply chain space, because as that product gets removed from the shelf, and when the store person comes in and scans that tag, then it can be fed back up into an ERP, so you can have a seamless experience from that online to that in-store experience. So if I decide to come into the store, I know the product's there. If I decide to call up and to order that product, I know it's there, because we now have a way of digitally recording and observing and managing products on that front. And really it's that move towards having a supply chain focus into a retail space. There was talks around how some of the retail stores and the way and the footprint that have been designed currently is going to shift. So at the moment, if you look at a standard retailer, you've got let's say an 80% of the storefront and then maybe a 20% warehouse. Now they're using that whole store to be a digital warehouse, and collecting data in that store is proving to be effective inside that in the supply chain. And the more data you collect, the better the decisions that you can make on planning and inventory.
So supply and manufacturing is the next step in that supply chain loop, and the customer demand pushes it through and they request certain products. In supply and manufacturing, the big key here is around knowing exactly what the customer wants and making sure what they produce is fit for purpose. Now, from an actual product sense, they do that. There's no dramas. They make the products, it's all spec'd and it's great. However, it's making sure that the product is made as efficiently as possible and therefore that efficiency pushes down the supply chain. And because it is the first step, if there's any delays there, you subsequently get delays all the way through. Part of that is really understanding the assets that are being used. So in a manufacturing plant, there's a lot of data that can be captured around the assets, and making sure that you're aware that asset A is working to its most optimum level. And whether it's sensor technology, whether there's software attached to it, there's always ways of being able to pull that data and then utilize it. Beyond that, it's also then looking at who can utilize that data. And one thing that we aren't overly great at doing here in Australia, but is they do quite often in the US and also through Asia, is sharing the data, especially around manufacturing and the equipment used in manufacturing. And that data is around the efficiency runs. So the ability to share that data and learn from partners, even learning from competitors of how they do it. One thing that we're learning in today's environment is understanding how something is made is not your point of difference. Your point of difference is the control of your supply chain. So more and more companies are more comfortable with sharing that type of data around their manufacturing lines to help the industry as a whole produce more product for them. Because once again, we look back at the supply and demand side of it. Them being a customer or a consumer, they're asking their manufacturers of their robotic units, how much more efficiency can we get out of it? So it's sharing that information, and you can only get it by the collaboration of that type of data. With that, once the product's made, you're now the raw sense of the product data, and you're the raw source of that product data. And you have the ability to share that down the supply chain, so you're not duplicating the need for that data to then be recorded and re-recorded. And what I mean by that, something as simple as volumetrics. If you're the raw manufacturer of a product and you make it, you then have that ability to say, okay, that product is X centimeters wide by X centimeters deep. And then you share that data. Currently, what happens in Australia is the manufacturer will make the data, or make the product, sorry, but that data isn't shared. Or if it is shared, it's not shared in a standardized format for it to be able to be consumed in the supply chain with more efficiency than it is today. That's then requiring companies to step in and have their own interventions around being able to collect that data. And as you can see off the slide, there's a piece of software there that's attached to one of our Panasonic Toughbooks, which is around cubing. And that's been introduced into the market. So through the supply chain, companies can capture that data and be sure that what they're capturing is the correct width and length. And then you pair that up with weighing technology, you all of a sudden get all the volumetrics that you need. And in the supply chain, that data is crucial, because as a manufacturer, once you send that product to either the distributor or the retailer, they're using that volumetrics to understand, where am I going to place that in my warehouse? Where am I going to place that on the shelf in my retail store? However, from that end, you then look at that data that you're collecting and saying, where else can it be used? And the other place that that can be used is within logistics. So if the logistics companies know in advance the size of the product they're receiving and have surety that that's going to be the size moving forward, then that helps them better plan what they are doing. And later on, I'll go into a bit more depth around what that looks like. But there's a number of technologies out there which will help customers and consumers within that supply chain, not the end user, be able to get the data that they need from a supply and manufacturing point of view. One other piece of data that is crucial and is becoming rather prevalent here in Australia is around that provenance and country of origin. And again, you're only really going to know that from the supplier or the manufacturer. If that data is not shared, it's really difficult for the retailer to be 100% sure where that product's come from, and then being able to tick off compliance through the supply chain, not only for consumer goods products, but even for trade goods, makes it very difficult. So as you can see, right at the start of this manufacturing and supply process, capturing that data and then sharing that data is key to moving that forward and being sure that what you're sharing with your partners is what's the useful data needed to going beyond your doors and your manufacturing plants.
Thanks, Charbel. And just to connect that into the retail front, is this image here around that understanding the warehouse and what is available in that real-time visibility. And I was in a warehouse talking to the floor manager, and he mentioned this this aspect of picking and what happens when an item gets picked or if it doesn't get picked, and how does that affect going down through the chain. And if we can move on to the next slide, what happens there at the retail front? And he mentioned this story about this this lady that was buying a pasta sauce, and she bought the same pasta sauce every single week to feed for her family. And really, it was something that is not a common sauce, but more it was more a speciality. And in the warehouse front, they missed that pick. That sauce didn't get to go onto that truck. How does that affect it down the line? And when this lady wanted to make to make this meal, she didn't have that sauce. And why that's so important is because for her, she took it upon herself to write a letter saying, to the supermarket, the sauce that I've been ordering for years hasn't arrived. It's not here. I don't know what to do about my meal. People are going to be unhappy. And even though it's a very simple story, but it really tells us what happens when that visibility doesn't occur within that supply chain. Where does it affect on a personal level, on that storefront? And that's where it's all and that's where it's all happening. And that's where it's the basis of not being able to fulfill an order comes to life. So how can you help your customers see that? And something that we talk a lot about is this vision technology. Using cameras to be able to understand more, collect more data. How are the people picking what they need to pick to get onto the truck to get to this lady that needs that sauce? Is it also on that retail front? How do we know what stock is there? As the customers needs change, how are you adapting to that? The ability even for competitors. So you've got this war on Amazon and the online presence. But really what happens is that when you're collecting this data and you're able to read it, you can react quickly to it. So some parts in that, if we look at going back to electronic shelf labels, that ability to understand what's happening in the marketplace, how much Amazon is pricing it for, and adapt dynamically inside that store. Cameras that can be able to look at the storefront and realize whether there is some stock outages. What's happening? Is there a time of day? Is there an event that's coming up that is fueling that demand? So being able to understand that data. And the first time you collect that data, right, it's going to give you results for that period. As time goes on, and every year that you're collecting more data, you're starting to understand more trends. What is happening in not only on the warehouse floor, but on that retail space? What type of vision do you need to be collecting to be able to make those decisions at that time? And so for example, when you look back at electronic shelf labels, we think about the ability to even that time to change pricing strategies based on the time of day. So to understand this is the time of day, we know that people coming into this storefront at this time, this demographic that need those prices, and how do we also adapt to those changing needs. So collecting the data through the whole way can really maximize that customer experience. And if we revert back to that first picture of that person holding up the credit card and the phone, right, is to think, how do we really get them to not really be confused on whether they're happy or they're mad, but really to go, you know what, I've experienced something really good here. You know, I'm using data to help my customers. And I think that's the key takeaway here. And that link between distribution, retail, and the customer experience in the middle.
Thanks, Andrew. And I mean, that point around really making sure the customer's getting what they're asking for. And we've got to keep in mind when we talk about customers, we've got the end user, so the person consuming the product right at the end. But in the supply chain, you've got customers all the way through the supply chain. And if you look at the farm industry, and I'll give you a bit of an example of how data is used within that industry. If you're farming apples in the Australian market, you grade those apples and you effectively say, okay, we've got grades 1 through to 5, and within those grade levels, 1's your premium apples and 5 are your not so great apples. And along within that supply chain, different customers pay different pricing depending on the quality of that apple. Now, in some environments, that's manually managed. So you've got humans actually looking at that product and making the call on whether, okay, am I going to grade this a 1? Am I going to grade it a 3? Or am I going to grade it a 5? So that data and that ability sits with inside a person's mind. Whereas if you add a bit of technology to it, and there's technology out there around sorting and the ability to have sensors that can sense the product, be able to determine with sensors and cameras, determine the quality of that product, and then project imagery onto that product to tell the end user, to tell the human being at the end of that line, this is being graded as a 3, take it and put it in the 3 basket. This has been graded as a 1, this has been graded as a 5. That's really important, because what you can't afford as the distributor, what you can't afford to happen is a grade 5 apple go to a grade 1 customer, because the grade 1 customer is paying a premium for the better quality, and therefore you need to be able to manage that. So again, a great example of having the right data, you know, for the right purpose within that supply chain. And as I said, there's solutions out there that help with it and can make sure that you're getting that right for the consumer and then subsequently for the end user. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Abel.
From a logistics point of view, and once again, as we make our way through this supply chain, we're now getting to the tail end of it, and it's the logistics to the customer. And at the moment, this is where it seems to be, this is where the war is happening within the Australian market, and it's all around logistics. And it's around logistics because of customer demand. Customers have got more demand around when they want to receive deliveries, how they want to receive it, and also to a point of whether they want it broken up. If they go and order multiple products, customers have been demanding on whether they're happy to get split loads or whether they want it all shipped together. And this can only be gathered through data. And through the events of last year, I know myself, quite a lot of products started making its way through the front door through online purchasing. And one thing I don't recall ever being asked in any of my online purchasing was, are you happy to receive the goods separately? So we were finding, me and my wife, when we were ordering goods, we were finding that some of them would come all together, and sometimes you'd get your products 2 or 3 days apart. And it made me think, if that data was collected, then you'd be able to really get into what the customer needs. And as the customer, I would probably prefer to have 3 or 4 orders which were going to come separately. I'd prefer it to be put all together and delivered in one go, especially if I'm not home and I miss it, because then I've got to race off to the post office, grab it from the post office, and I'm doing that 2 or 3 days in a row. So just a real to-life example of where collecting the right data is important. However, as the customer and the consumer, I'm the one that drives that demand. So I'm sure if enough people send them email saying, maybe you should look at collecting this data, that's something they will collect moving forward. But the role of the logistics company today is massive. And for them, they're playing catch up in a sense, because customer demand and customer needs change. And in Australia, logistics companies are really good now at being able to notify you. I mean, especially if you deal with any of the majors. I know myself, Australia Post is really good at sending messages out to let you know in the morning your goods are on its way. Do you want it delivered to home? Do you want it delivered to a post office? Or do you want it delivered to a parcel locker? And through responding, that triggers a chain of commands for them to know where that product goes. However, what we're finding overseas, and I think this will make its way into Australia in the next few years, is logistics companies wanting to be more reactive. You know, I get that SMS at the start of the morning asking me when I want my goods delivered. But if that delivery is due at 3 o'clock and my circumstances change at 2 o'clock, logistics companies are now looking at, okay, how do we get Chabel's goods to him when he said, I want it delivered at 3 o'clock at my house, but all of a sudden at 2 o'clock, something happens, he's not going to be home. You know, can we divert it and get it to a parcel locker so he can then go pick it up later, or do we get it sent to a post office? And what we're finding, especially in our conversations with logistics companies, is they're looking at how to manage loads on their vehicles. And this goes back to what you said, Andrew, around vision technology. And it's the reverse of what I mentioned earlier around cubing. Companies are looking at how do they manage the amount of spare space in their vehicles, being a truck, a van, so on and so forth, to be able to then pair that up with telematics around where is that vehicle in its route, and can we divert him or that driver to say, go and pick this up because this now needs to go somewhere else. None of that is achievable without data, and none of it's achievable without live, clean data that can be used ongoing. So that's really important for the end user, and it's going to be the clean data that is coming up the supply chain that is going to help those logistics companies, because they need to know that the product they're receiving, the weights and measures are correct. They go into their vehicle and nothing's changed with that data. They then also need to know where it needs to go from an address point of view. And that data needs to be shared real time and live so they can make their decisions moving forward. But that takes you through that supply chain loop and brings you back to the customer, because you could have done everything beautifully leading up to this point. But if the customer right at the end, or if the consumer at the end doesn't make the delivery on the time that they expect it, that could well and truly ruin that whole supply chain experience. No matter how well you did at the start, that last point is really important. And that last mile is the challenge that Australia is facing at the moment around how do we do that and how do we get it to what the consumer wants it to be. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Charbel. And just to conclude here, it's really around how data at the right time can help your customers. And that's all the customers right the way through that end user pressing the button, ordering a raw material, all the way through to the delivery driver and to when it gets to that customer at the end. And collecting that data is really about creating that seamless experience for the end user or the customer. So we'd like to thank for all the attendees for hearing Charbel and I go through this presentation. Please feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn and also to visit our digital booth. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And that concludes our last session of the day. I'd like to say thank you very much to all of our speakers and to all of our sponsors. The exhibition area will remain open till 4 p.m. So if you haven't done already, please make your way over there and speak to the exhibitors about the solutions that they have, which will be perfect for your business. As I stated at the beginning, our next event will be between the 19th and 21st of July, 2022. However, we will be putting on a lot more online content before then. We hope you have a great rest of the week, and we look forward to seeing you sometime soon. Thanks.